welcome tonight. For those that don't know me, my name's Anne Cooper. We are trying to make a concerted effort to re-engage more with our alumni, and we'd like to hold more of these sorts of events. They're meant to be low-key, some interesting speakers. Julian's hiding down the front there. So if you've got any ideas you would like to be engaged, please let us know. We'd like to try and reach out to a lot more. We know we've got 3,500 alumni here in Sydney alone. We make contact at various points, probably with about 1,000. So as you can see, there's a big number that we haven't been able to reach, and we need you guys to start kind of tap a few more on the shoulder. And our information of contacting you is only as good as what you can feed back to us. So if you can help, Di, wave over there. If you wouldn't mind passing either a business card or some details to her at some point tonight, even if it's as much as, actually I know a few people that probably haven't been involved, if you could just mention to Di. Tonight we have got two very engaging speakers, hopefully going to be somewhat controversial. So firstly I'd like to introduce Tom Smith. Tom has just joined us at Macquarie. Tom has been more recently at UQ and at ANU. Probably one of the best known and prolific researchers in finance, and particularly most recently in the environmental finance space, with Martina, who is there. Martina has just also joined us at Macquarie, so we are absolutely building capability in this space. And Tom will be is the head of the finance department for the faculty under our new integrated model. And Julian is an alumnus, and we were working out 2001 to about 2003, somewhere around there.
Took a bit longer than that. 5 or 6, I think.
You enjoyed it,
and
Right.
Julian also taught for us. Some of you may have done numerous versions of Julian's course. I think we started with carbon finance and
I
went
started with emissions trading and then went to carbon finance. Where's
Yes.
Paul did the course. Yeah.
Poor Julian is, he was one of those guys that came in at a time where regulations were changing so rapidly, and at the end we just decided poor Julian had to rewrite his course. Well,
Every 6 months.
oh, unbelievable. And now Julian, well, he's had a long career in the energy space, and most recently he's an asset manager with Energy Australia. So we're having a little bit of the theoretical and the I'm in the real world view, and I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to leave you to it.
Thanks, Anne. That's fantastic. I'm going to lead off. So I have only just joined, but my staff card says 2004. So I think it's because, you know, I've been doing reviews of Macquarie, you know, as an external person for ages. And the one thing those reviews always concluded was that the Masters of Applied Finance is the jewel in the crown of Macquarie. And that's due not only to the outstanding professors, but also the outstanding students. So it's a great pleasure to be here. And I promise I'm not going to ask you for any money, ever. So we want to reach out a lot more and provide a lot more service, and I promise I'll never ask you for money. So anything you want, like a talk like this, an in-house talk, whatever it is, right? We want to do it because you are the jewel in the crown. So first of all, I'm going to give you the science behind all of this. So there's a guy called Rockström, and he's at the Stockholm University. So he's published both in Nature and in Science. So it's serious stuff, right? People talk about saving the Earth, the Greenies talk about saving the Earth. Well, it turns out the Earth is just fine. It's just fine. It's been around for 3.5 billion years, and by all accounts, it's going to be around for a few billion years more. It doesn't care whether it's 1,000 degrees and molten. Right? That's like a nice mud bath. Right? It doesn't care at all. These are the 9 boundary conditions to sustain human life on the planet, right? So it's not about saving the planet. People have really got this mixed up, right? It's about sustaining human life. And so this one is the one we're talking about. Well, we've barely reached this at all, right? So I know there's a lot of fuss about it. You know why? I think it's because people have given up on the others, right? So if you look at the biosphere integrity, that's talking about genetic diversity, you know. What it's saying is the only animals you're going to have are your cats and dogs and chickens, right? Because they're the ones you're keeping, right? Everything else is at risk, but it's gone so far gone. Let's forget about having United Nations meetings about that. There's nothing we can do. This one here is the biochemical flows, and that's all our fertilizer, the nitrogen and phosphorus. Well, that's so far gone that we're out of luck with fishing and everything. Freshwater use is okay at the moment. Land system change is not good, but it's not as bad as you'd imagine. Aerosol loading has been a big success. We can pat ourselves on the back. The ozone depletion has been a success. Aerosol loading we don't know about. Novel entities are all the things we introduced, like the plastics and the spent fuel rods from radiation. So it turns out we've reached 1, 2, 3, 4 of these 9 planetary boundaries necessary to sustain human life on the planet. So it's not just about climate change. Well, I think why they've focused on it is that it's something they can do. We're not quite at that really bad breach that we see for the fertilizer and the biosphere integrity. So this is just to put it in context. There's going to be a lot more in this global environmental change space. So all of this brings threats, right, to the business. And this is research by Professor Linda Looker down the back there. These are all of the boundaries, and these are the potential threats. And of course, threats, we're business people, we see opportunity, right? So this is not about the effect that businesses are having on the environment, right? We don't really care about that, right? That doesn't cost us. But this is threats to the business from the environment that we're worried about. So if we're really worried about climate change and sea level rises, right, and the effects of climate change, and if it really is true there's going to be 500,000 refugees, climate refugees, well, there's money to be made here, right? There's immense infrastructure required, immense social security safety nets, all these things. And the thought is the refugees are going from east to west and south to north. So if you're in Canada or the Nordic countries, right, that's likely where the refugees are going to end up. So there's a lot of investment that can be done there and a lot of money to be made. So I'm not going to go through them all. We'll make all these slides available, but each of these threats represent opportunities as well for investment. So the opportunities are really around clean tech, right, in this space. So, and we're sure of this, right, because there's an enormous amount of R&D expenditure by business and government, and there's an enormous number of clean tech patents, right? So we're able to value these patents, right? And since the Paris Agreement in 2015, the holders of these patents are starting to commercialize them. So the way you value a patent is to assume some function, right, some fraction of the patents out there are going to be further developed. So we assumed only 1%, there's several 100,000. It's the fastest growing patent class across all patents. It's second only a number behind pharmaceuticals. And we know that pharmaceuticals they read the books because they get a 7-year patent on a good drug. But at the end of it, they do a little tweak to it and get another patent, right? So the numbers are inflated, so they get another 7 years. So this is, I expected to see robotics, or things about robotics as being a large number of patents, but it wasn't. Right? It was the big story in the patent space is clean technology. So if only 1%, and this is a very conservative number, of the patents were further developed. And what I'm talking about here is not that they're going to be successful. A 40% chance of successful R&D, 40% chance of successful approval, and only a low chance of commercial success. That will add, and others have looked at it as well, $19 trillion worth of wealth. Right, so this is going to drive GDP and wealth for decades to come. Yeah? So, and Julian will tell you a little bit about the costs, but the clean tech costs have really come down. So throughout history, there's been 8 technological breakthroughs, and you're aware of all this, right? The railway, electricity, automobiles, finishing with the internet, right? So all of the indications say that clean tech is going to be the next technological breakthrough. This is the thing that's going to drive wealth, just like biotech did, like PCs did, like the internet did. It's also got some downsides as well, right? Because people are going to get a little over exuberant, right? Trying to pick winners and losers. And I'm going to talk about that soon. So that clean energy is approaching a tipping point. There's no rational decision, no rational decision maker will build another coal-fired power station anywhere in the world, right? Because when you're talking about building a new power station, renewables are by far the cheaper alternative. Now that's different to maintaining the power stations we've got now. They're fine. No one is talking about closing down the coal-fired power stations because given that we've already built them, the marginal cost is very low, right? It's lower than the renewable. What we're talking about is if you're going to build a new one. So you might see if Pauline Hanson becomes Premier of Queensland, that they'll build a coal-fired power station up there, but that's got nothing to do with profit making, right? That's all to do with politics. So that's her stated that she'll become a coalition party if she'll become part of a coalition if they build a new coal-fired power station in her preferred place. So Julian's going to go through these costs with you. We're debating, right? But I think we probably agree on what's going to happen if there's a new. So these opportunities, right? So it's just not my and Professor Leonard Looker's calculations that show that this could generate $19 trillion worth of wealth. Independent agencies such as let me read it, the International Energy Agency come up with this, and Bloomberg reports it. So that is not out to lunch at all, right? That's very plausible given the figures. And the investment around that is about $30 trillion, right? So an awful lot of investment going on. The big issue is going to be around renewables only really work when the wind is blowing, right, and the sun is shining. So what do you do outside of that, right? So what you need to have is, in conjunction with the renewables, you need to have some storage mechanism. So there's a company called Tesla, you've heard of it? Well, remember the original Tesla lost out, right, way back in the 1900s, right? He lost out. I think this guy might be losing out too, and I'll go into the reasons, right? So how do you store this energy? You have a surplus from the sun and the wind during the day, right, or when the wind's blowing. So there's lots of ways to store. One is you can pump water back over a dam, right, and release it. That's hydro, but you need to have the mechanisms in place, right? So we're doing hydro too. It's not out to lunch completely. Given that you've got a hydro, then that's going to be really cheap. And the conversion rate, energy in, energy back, is nearly 100%. The other is the giant battery, right? But there's limitations to battery technology that I'm not sure we're going to overcome. The other is, the big one, is the hydrogen fuel cell. So this is where I think Tesla might be in trouble, right, in terms of the future. So Tesla is going all out on the electric car based on battery, right? And you know how long it takes to fill up and you know there's technical issues around batteries, right? Toyota, which has been going for 100 years plus, has banked its whole future on the hydrogen fuel cell, right? The whole thing, right? And the hydrogen fuel cell is still an electric car, but there's almost no limit to the range, right? It just depends on how much hydrogen you have. And you know how it works. Hydrogen combines with oxygen. In the process of doing that, water is created, but also electricity. So it's a simple thing. Now, do you know that 75% of the universe we're in is hydrogen? And the other 25% is hydrogen that's been converted into helium by those big glowing things in the sky, right? So we're in a hydrogen world, right? So the big issue is one of these companies is going to be right and one of them is going to be wrong. Your grandchildren are going to think it's obvious, right? They're going to say, why didn't you invest in? Yeah, but it's pretty hard at the moment. If I was a betting man, I'm not. If I was a betting man, I'd be backing the hydrogen fuel cell, right? It just seems to make sense to me. And also, it takes a minute to fill it up at the petrol bowser. BMW has been working on a hydrogen car since 1985, so that's some of the issue. But the big issue with hydrogen is it's very lonely, right? It binds with everything it meets, right? So to get hydrogen by itself, you've got to unbind it from whatever it's bound to, right? And principally water. And at the moment, that takes energy, right? So that takes energy, and you don't get the same conversion rate as you do for the hydro, for example, right? In converting that water to hydrogen and then the hydrogen back to energy. So there's issues around there. Google has just made a huge investment. Google Molten, you've heard of that? So it's a molten salt. Solar thermal, endosalt, it sort of you store it as heat, right? And then you add it to antifreeze, and that creates electricity, right? And that's incredibly efficient, a lot more efficient than batteries. You can keep this salt that you've got going for 40 years plus, right? So that's incredibly efficient. So all of that is going on, and you're going to have some combination of renewables and the storage mediums. To have a guaranteed supply. Now, the coal-fired power stations aren't going anywhere, right? Even the most optimistic projections have at most 66% clean tech by 2050, right? And there'll still be coal-fired power stations through to 2100. So no one's talking about closing down all the coal-fired power stations. It's just if one has to be closed down and you think about building a new one, then the economics are now clear. Right? It's got to be clean tech, but you need to have clean tech plus some sort of storage mechanism, right? But some of them are, looking more fruitful, more promising than others. So I think that's all I've got at the moment. Going to hand over to Julian.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so I'm not sure if we build this as a debate or an address. I agree with a lot of things that Tom said, and some of them I don't, and we can turn that into an audience discussion afterwards. So yeah, this issue was part of my master's thesis at Macquarie. One of the electives I did was a master's thesis called Pricing Carbon in the Capital Markets, because the fact that you can actually turn the objective of carbon reduction into a price, like a carbon price, a price on carbon, then means that it all works in our financial models, and we can see what happens to investments or operating costs when we include a price on carbon. It's harder to do it with nitrogen or biodiversity or some of the other ones, so it's kind of neat in a way, but it's also a pressing issue, as we all know. It was topical when I was doing it, and obviously when I was teaching it, and I think it's even more topical now. Energy sort of went into a period between 2008 and about a few years ago where we were in an oversupplied market, and prices were really low. No one on the generation side was making any real money, and customers were loving it. And within about 2 years, that's flipped to the exact opposite and caused, obviously, the energy debate that now it's kind of just only thanks to the SSM debate, energy's got off the front page, which is just a bit of a relief for a change. Look, I'm going to cover 3 questions in this talk. One is why have energy prices gone up and where are they going next? Secondly is what's cheaper, solar or coal? And we'll have that discussion. And thirdly, how do you integrate renewable energy or clean tech into the grid? Before I go on, anyone know in the audience what this is? Any volunteers? Yeah, Port Augusta. This is what a 2-unit coal-fired power station looks like. So it's the northern power station in Port Augusta. 2 years ago, it was shut down or decommissioned, and they spent a bit of time just sort of pulling it apart. And then, sorry, I'm going to show you that video. Oh, it's gone now. I was going to show you this video. Actually, I will, if you bear with me, call it up. Yeah. 4, 3, I haven't seen anything like this.
1, firing.
It's working on my screen.
No.
We didn't test this. That's such a shame.
Just do an escape and we'll change the display settings.
Oh.
Sounded fantastic.
It did, didn't it?
Blame the NBN.
Now my screen's frozen. Okay, so you've all heard what it looks like for a power station to be demolished, and we'll see if we can get the video working because it's pretty graphic. It's like it brings home what the energy transition's all about, is the retirement of coal and the replacement with renewable energy. But I didn't want to over-dramatise it in the sense that it's not the first time anyone's blown up a coal-fired power station and brought it to the ground. That's happened all over the place, all over the world. Our Tallawarra power station down in Wollongong, it's a 10-year-old combined cycle gas turbine. It used to have an old coal-fired power station on it, which was obviously taken to the ground, so then we could build this. What makes this different is that in this decade and all the decades going forward, it's more likely than not that pulling down a coal-fired power station, that the energy that we used from it would be replaced by renewable energy and not by other thermal energy. So that's the big change in the market that's happened, and I will get to a graph on how we choose what we build when we retire something. Before Northern, there were other power stations closing down. So we had Wallerawang Power Station up in just over the Blue Mountains that shut a few years back. Anglesea shut. Hazelwood, obviously, last year in Victoria. So this will be probably the tightest supply-demand balance in the national electricity market we've had this coming summer, of any of the summers that we've had. And it won't be the last. So Liddell, there's been a lot of discussion about AGL's Liddell project, Liddell Power Station, due for closure in 2022. So that's probably the next one to go. And the real question is, how do you replace that energy? So to the first question, if this is completely frozen, hold on, resident extended, resident main.
If it's frozen, we'll just go find technical.
Okay. That was lucky. I was just pressing the buttons until something worked. Okay, so this is from the Finkel report. So monthly average wholesale prices and base load futures prices. So the electricity is traded in a few different ways. There's a spot market that I won't go into, and there's also a futures market where buyers and sellers, so buyers being retailers that buy energy to then supply to customers, and sellers being the generators, can trade either on forward or futures. And each region is traded differently. So you've got here Queensland, Victoria, New South Wales and South Australia. And you can see over that, during the early part of that, or the late part of that period I mentioned where there was no supply, prices were all around $40 a megawatt hour. But then over a period of the next 3 years, they've really accelerated and climbed up to the point where sort of the average is about $80 a megawatt hour. And there's two main reasons why that's happened. One is basic economics. You're all finance people, so you understand supply and demand. You take out that amount of coal or that amount of baseload supply, you're going to lift the price. The second thing is that as we were doing that, the gas price was also accelerating, because when you take out coal, you need to replace it with something, and the replacement was gas. But the gas prices were also going up because of we're exporting the LNG out of Queensland. So that combination of those two things led to the reason why $40 essentially became $80. The third one's a little bit more nuanced, which is, well, the obvious question is, well, before we had a market, we had central planning. And a central planner would say, well, if I'm going to retire something, I'm going to make sure that I build some stuff before I retire that. But we're not in a central planning scenario, we're in a market scenario. And in a market scenario, you just do whatever you want that makes sense if the investment doesn't make sense. So one of the reasons why the coal-fired power stations are retiring is that, yes, their ongoing operational cost is low, but they get to an age, and this is certainly the case with Liddell, I suspect it was the case with Northern and Hazelwood, they get to an age where it's just so expensive to keep them going from a capital cost point of view. I likened it to like trying to keep a 20-year-old car in the road when the transmission's gone and it needs new tyres and the head gasket's gone, so you need to replace that. At what point do you say, you know what, it's better that we put this money into something new rather than just trying to keep this old clunker going? And that's kind of where, when you get to about 40, 50 years old, which is Northern was a bit younger than that, but Hazelwood was getting there. Liddell will be 50 years old by 2022. You get to that kind of facing a big cliff of capital to get to the next stage. That's why they were shut down. The issue was that they were shut down with no notice, about half a year's notice. So the market wasn't there to know that there was a requirement to then fill it in. And that's why Finkel, one of the Finkel recommendations is there must be a minimum amount of notice. I can't remember if it's 3 years or 5 years. So what that does, and we were a strong advocate of that, what that does is it says if someone wants to implement a shutdown, then the whole market knows about it. And this is what's really frustrating about the Liddell argument, is because you have someone giving you 7 years notice. We're going to shut Liddell in 22. And so everyone, whether it's AGL or us, we've got plans, AGL's got plans on how do you replace that capacity. But if you've got a government saying, oh no, we want to keep it going, then all of those plans, well, do you invest them or do you shelve them, or what do you do? So it recreates investment uncertainty just by removing what was certain and making it uncertain. So that's kind of part of the dynamic that we've been grappling with. The other part of it, of why weren't things being built here, was what I called the roller coaster, and referred to how I had to rewrite the course notes every 6 months on emissions trading or carbon finance. Is while in an investment climate where it's investors making the call, and as practitioners here in the audience that fund these things, we need a stable set of rules so we know how to price, how to put it in a spreadsheet, how to predict earnings, and then make the call. And all through this earlier period, sort of back 2013, you had a carbon price coming in and then pulling it away. You had a renewable energy target. It was debated about, would we have one? Would it be higher? Would it be lower? No one was investing anything until the point where everyone agreed that the renewable energy target, for use of an example, was going to be set at a certain level. And then everyone could start going again. Retailers started writing power purchase agreements. Banks started funding them. But they're coming onto line sort of in the next 2 or 3 years. It takes a while to get your development pipeline going. So we're actually we've climbed up quite a way, but what we're seeing from here is backwardation in the curve, that from here there's going to be a massive renewables build, solar, mainly solar and wind. used to be mainly about wind, but now solar's come down so much faster than wind that we're getting a lot of solar investment now as well as wind. And that's what's replacing the loss of all of these coal-fired power stations, so Hazelwood and Northern and so on. So that's the sort of the history of why we are where we are, how it became front page news and where we're going from here. But it also, that page in a nutshell is replicating the dynamic that we're facing over the next 4 or 5 decades as we retire all the coal and build effectively a modern grid based on renewable energy to replace it. So, to the second question of what's cheaper, solar or coal? What I've done here is, and there's no source because the guys that did my course, so Paul will probably remember a slide like this. I've got a calculator that determines, you put in the cost per megawatt of installed capacity across the technologies, and it figures out, based on the same cost of capital, what is the effective cost per megawatt hour of each of these technologies. So that's the blue, the capex, and then how much to run it, which is the opex. Then fuel, and I've done gas at $8 a gigajoule, and then carbon, if there is a carbon price at $20, and how does that all stack up? Have people seen the Bloomberg? I think, yeah, the Bloomberg has coal a lot higher, and one of the reasons they've got coal a lot higher is they put a huge risk factor on carbon pricing. I don't do that. In my view, that's double counting. To actually include an explicit carbon price and also include the risk of carbon price is doubling up on the same risk. If you knew what the carbon price is, then there's no risk. Or if there is a risk, then you shouldn't explicitly price it as well. It's just a personal view. But yes, on a dollars per megawatt hour basis, for dollars to produce amount of energy, solar was up here, and now we're seeing people writing power purchase agreements for solar and wind around $60 a megawatt hour. So that's how cheap solar has become, and that's because globally China, well, it was Germany, and now China are just able to produce huge amounts of solar panels at relatively cheap cost, and then the installation of it has been commoditized almost, where you've got large companies, large installation companies like Downer, to name one, just going around and making this, just becoming experts in how to deploy the technology in the field. So if you compare it with brown coal or black coal, we're now at sort of $80 or $90. So if the question is where do you get the energy from and what's the least cost energy, I absolutely agree with Tom. No rational investor, and you have to extract the politicians from that subset, that Venn diagram, would invest in coal relative to the dollars per megawatt hour. Now there's a little asterisk on that, as a disclaimer that I'll get into next. You've also got gas CCGT here, combined cycle gas turbine, which is the most efficient power source essentially. The reason why the carbon block is less is that gas produces power at only 0.4 tonnes of CO2 per megawatt hour, whereas brown coal's about 1.2, 1.3, and black coal's about 0.9. And here is the nub of why the carbon price, not knowing whether there's a carbon price or not, creates uncertainty. So I described the RET uncertainty before. This is all about the uncertainty you get when you don't know whether there's going to be a carbon price or not. Because if you're, just imagine you're a coal-fired proponent, you would say, okay, well, my numbers look really good. If I build coal, I'm much better than gas. So let's build coal. But your risk then is that, well, the carbon price might come in and make me uncompetitive relative to the others like gas. If, on the other hand, you're a gas proponent, you think, well, I'm uneconomic unless carbon comes in. So you get to this dichotomy that, you know, which way do you go? If you invest one and you're not sure whether it's going to come in or not, you could be gazumped by the other side. Yeah.
Obviously, that doesn't include storage for wind or solar, does it?
Yeah, I'm going to get back to that later. Yeah, when you put storage, that's the asterisk. Yeah. So, yeah, okay, we'll accelerate to that point. When you do, this is dollars per megawatt hour on that axis. When you do dollars per megawatt hour, you're not comparing apples with apples, because it's easy just to inject, and the beauty and the problem with our national electricity market is it's technology neutral, which means whenever you produce a megawatt hour, you'll get paid for it at the market price. But it doesn't distinguish between variable output and firm, what they call baseload output. So if you had a grid only made up of wind and solar, there'd be times when the lights go out because you don't have the power. So then you bring up the need for storage. So I think, yeah, Tom's essentially covered this. There's a whole range of technology for storage. I remember sort of when I started in the industry, I remember when people used to say you can't store electricity. And what they meant was, which is still true right now, is that demand and supply have to be matched. Second for second, microsecond. If we turn the air conditioner off, there's a generator somewhere that will back down to reduce their demand. So it's instantaneously matched. And at that time, no one was talking about batteries, or yes, we did have pumped hydro facilities, but no one was talking about building new ones. All of the pumped hydros we had were existing hydro facilities that just happened to have the ability in the design to pump back up the hill. But now we're talking about building new storage. So we're talking about batteries like the Tesla battery, pumped hydro like Snowy Hydro 2.0, or the one that we're proposing at Kultana, which is based on seawater. And then there's batteries. And I was going to just spend a little bit of time on batteries versus pumped hydro, because we believe that they're complementary. You actually need both. What batteries bring is very fast response. So within milliseconds, they can be on the grid. So they talk about fast frequency response. And if you want only 1 or 2 hours of storage, then batteries are cheaper to build. Because to build a pumped hydro facility, a whole heap of civil infrastructure just for 2 hours, then or 1 hour, it's not going to be economic. So just to illustrate that, the Tesla battery is 100 megawatts, 100 megawatt capacity, 129 megawatt hours of storage, which means it's just over an hour of storage. So you drain it in an hour and then it's done. Pumped hydro, the one that we're building at, the one we're proposing, we're not building it yet, at Kultana, South Australia, is 1,770 megawatt hours and 225 megawatts. So it's almost 14 of the Tesla batteries. But if you were to get Tesla batteries that they're building in there in South Australia and build 14 of them, 14 of the world's biggest batteries, you don't get any economies of scale. So to build 8 hours of storage, which is what the pumped hydro is, you get about a third of the cost of building it in batteries. So if you need long storage, you're better off going pumped hydro. If you need short storage, you're better off with batteries. The other thing that pumped hydro brings that batteries don't is inertia. So inertia is the ability to keep frequency. Our grid spins at 3,000 RPM, 50 hertz, and inertia is the ability to keep it there if there's a disruption. So it's typically kept there by big spinning synchronous machines like coal-fired power stations that I showed earlier. So they each have their merits. We didn't talk about this stuff a few years ago because there was no need for, there wasn't this discussion about how do we build out coal and build in renewable energy, but now it's probably the most pressing issue on how you build a modern grid when almost everything you're proposing to build next is renewable. So you obviously need renewable plus storage to make it work. But this is happening not just here in Australia, it's obviously happening globally. So in closing, and I'm happy to take, Tom and I are happy to debate, because I'm a big bear on hydrogen, so we can have that debate if you, well, maybe we'll hold that for a question. But in closing, I mean, we're living through a very exciting time. I've been in the industry for 25 years. I think this is the most exciting time to be in it. Trillions of dollars of investment to come into the market, complete transformation in our energy supply, like as we're watching. And I mean, for me, it's really about, yeah, we can, your chart about, well, what matters and what can we control. for me it's kind of a moral question of what state do we leave the planet for the future generations. Yes, the planet will come and go before the planet does, but it's a kind of intergenerational equity question of what state are you leaving the planet, because we can have a bigger impact in a very short time and make that yellow bar red within our lifetimes. So is that what we want to do? That's where I am. Thank you.